Welcome back to the First Gnostic Church of Christ. We are continuing our read and commentary of the Gospel according to Thomas. We're on verse number 21. So let's go ahead and start. Verse 21. Mary said to Jesus, "What are your disciples like?" Here we are talking about Mary Magdalene, who was one of the followers of Jesus that had an understanding, a clear understanding of the passion of Christ, the compassionate side of Christ, the mysteries that Christ set forth. He would often confide in Mary in things about his disciples, as you can see here. So Christ looked at Mary as a source of support and understanding and someone that he could go to discuss the disciples. So it continues and says, he said, "They are like little children living in a field that is not theirs. When the owners of the field come, they will say, 'Give us back our field.' They take off their clothes in front of them in order to give it back to them, and they return their field to them." Notice a couple things. First off, Christ is comparing the apostles to children, meaning that they're innocent, meaning they don't really fully understand what they're doing. The owner of the field comes back, and the owner of the field not only takes the field back from the little children, but in addition to that, the owner goes further and says, "Give me your clothes." And so the little children, of course, give the field back to the rightful owner, and then the owner takes advantage of the little children by insisting that their clothes be taken as well. So this is what they do. But not only are the clothes being taken, but they're derobing themselves in front of, as an order has been given, as it says, they take off their clothes in front of them in order to give it back to them, and they return their field to them. This is the nature of the world we live in. The nature of the world is that the disciples are living in a temporary space. Anybody that has gnosis is not truly in their home. They're actually borrowing this world from the demiurge. They're actually borrowing. It's not their true home. So they are visitors, if you will, but not necessarily visitors that are welcomed or even given an invitation to come to this field called the Canoma. Now, once the owner, which in this case would be the demiurge and his minions, recognizes that you are a foreigner or you're an outsider from the Canoma, but you're actually a spiritual being from the Canoma, that you've recognized yourself as a spiritual being, you've got gnosis. Once the owner recognizes that, the owner then will not only insist you give back the field, but will then essentially rape you of all your dignity by ordering you to take off your clothes. So in other words, rob you of everything that you have. So this is important because later on in the same verse, Christ is going to revisit about the disciples and their vulnerabilities. So let's continue. "For this reason I say, if the owners of a house know that a thief is coming, they will be on guard before the thief arrives and will not let the thief break into their house, their domain, and steal their possessions." Now, of course, the demiurge and his minions do not know that these children are coming into their field, so he can't prepare what Christ is saying here. And also, this harkens back to verses in Thessalonians in the canonical text, as well as Matthew's, where Christ talks about returning like a thief in the night. So Christ is transitioning. He's making a smooth transition from the thief being the demiurge, and then he also being as a thief, Christ, as well as the disciples. And here's where he transitions with this sentence. He's saying that when you decide that your world is of this plane, the Canoma, you're a thief. But because the demiurge doesn't recognize the pleroma, or spiritual beings, then he's not going to know until you reveal to them, or he catches you in some way by you perhaps telling about the good news, for example. So it's not as though the demiurge can read your every thought. But if you're going to publicize the good news, you're going to publicize that you're a Gnostic Christian, so forth and so on, and you're going to spread the good news, then yes, the demiurge will be aware of this, because the demiurge is not always looking at every little detail of every corner of Earth. He has his minions and those that are in the middle that rule this planet, that are going about and taking tally, are figures of authority. When they find that out, they'll report back to whoever's in the upper command, so forth and so on, all the way up through the archons and finally back to the demiurge. And the demiurge will not be pleased. But the demiurge has made it so that you can't steal the demiurge's possessions. What does it mean? It means that within this existence, to no credit of the demiurge, exists truth. So he wants to guard whatever truth remains. He's the God of good and evil. He's not just the God of evil. So there is some good in him, so he has some truth in him. But he wants to keep that truth because it's power. There's no power found in darkness or ignorance, you see. So he knows this. And so he's not going to allow you to have any understanding beyond the simple earth realm. So it goes on. As for you then, be on guard against the world. So here, Christ is then saying to Mary, who's asking about the disciples, Christ is then transitioning and making that the demiurge is now the thief, because he's talking about the robber versus the thief here, you see, because earlier it said they take off their clothes in front of them in order to give it back to them. So they're robbing the clothes. The demiurge is robbing the clothes. But the thieves here are unintentionally using the field, borrowing it, if you will, being a thief of sorts. But the robber is taking the clothes. So in this case, it's the demiurge and its minions that are the robbers. And so that's what he's talking about. Prepare yourself with great strength so the robbers can't find a way to get to you. So once they get to you, they're going to take everything you have away from you, right? For the trouble you will expect will come. Let there be among you a person who understands. So Christ here is all at once also saying that prepare yourself with the armor of truth, the understanding of what's going to come by bringing forth that truth, because the trouble will come to you. See, for the trouble you expect will come. So how can you prepare yourself? Here it says, prepare yourselves with great strength, so the robbers can't find a way to get to you. Now, Christ is not saying that you can find a way to slip away, but he's talking about not allowing the robbers to get you to come back into the Kenoma, into the sleep, because he says the trouble you expect will come. So if you're going to bring forth the good news in Gnosis, then you are potentially increasing the odds that the robbers will come after you and take what little you have away from you. Christ is not guaranteeing you that won't happen, but you can certainly guard yourself from falling into the trap of going back to sleep. That's really what the robbers want. They want to intimidate you and frighten you and put terror in you until you line back up and you go back to sleep. And this is the understanding here. And then the last part of the verse says, when the crop ripened, he came quickly carrying a sickle and harvested it. Anyone here with 2 good ears had better listen. So Christ has given them an admonishment that not only is the demiurge going to come and put karma on everyone, as this is the universe of karma, the Kenoma. In addition to that, the logos of the universe will come as well and harvest good from evil. So in this case, evil being those that are of the divisive mind versus those that are whole and do not judge. So the sickle, also you can think of someone in mythology we consider that carries a sickle would be death, right? So death is coming, and it comes quickly because no one knows when it comes. And when it comes like a thief in the night. And why then is Christ also representative of the one that carries the sickle, or the thief? Well, it's because it's the truth of light that is bringing forth the liberation of the spirit from the body, as well as the soul liberated from the body, the flesh body. And so what you have is that it's actual light. It's the spirit that ultimately is trying to find its way out, but it keeps getting trapped back in and getting recycled. So the only thing that's guiding you out is the spirit, and it's going to allow you to break free from the cycle of reincarnation. And that is why Christ is like that, or equated to the one that carries the sickle, but also death as well, because in the same time that you die, you may also be liberated from this place. Let's move to verse 22. Jesus saw some babies nursing. He said to his disciples, these nursing babies are like those who enter the Father's kingdom. So this one's pretty simple, right? He's talking about the innocence of a child, the one who is closest to Gnosis, to the pleroma, because when you die, your spirit goes back to the pleroma. Your soul goes to the demiurge. If you believe in the demiurge and all his ways, you don't have Gnosis. Or if you don't wake up to Gnosis, then your soul goes to the demiurge and gets judged for reincarnation through karma. Those that break free and have Gnosis, but don't necessarily do all the works of Christ, will then ascend beyond the demiurge and will be accounted to the holy souls in the 8th realm and above, and they will be allowed by Christ to decide if they want to stay there or go back. This is why the babies are closest to the pleroma, because their spirits are gone back after death, and then of course when they're first born, that's the closest point at which they are pure and untainted by the Kenoma at that point. So these nursing babies are like those who enter the Father's kingdom. When you go into the kingdom, the Father will see you as a baby, will see you as innocent, and as someone to protect, someone to nurture, someone to love. They said to him, then shall we enter the Father's kingdom as babies? Jesus said to them, when you make the 2 into 1, and here this is following up from what's before. In other words, when you are going to make your adult self and the baby into 1, then that's what he's referring to. But also he's talking talking about the soul and the spirit into one. When you become full, when you take the flesh away and you make those two, the flesh and the spirit, into one entity, then the flesh is no longer needed. And then it continues. And when you make the inner like the outer, here it's referring to the kingdom of God within you, the hope of glory, the Christ within you. When you make that part like the outside, so what does it mean? It's saying that when you manifest the word flesh, in other words, you walk the path of Christ, the spirit made flesh. So when the spirit within you becomes flesh, and the outer like the inner, and the upper like the lower, that is, as above, so below, heaven on earth as in heaven. And when you make male and female into a single one, remember that prior to everyone entering into the Kenoma, male and female were equal, and they were consorts. They were one unit, and they worked in complementary fashion. They were a pair, but a syzygy. So they worked together as a unit, not against one another. So they were a full unit. And the male and female were attributes of that entity known as the consort, so that the male will not be male, nor the female be female, meaning there is no gender. It's genderless. We only see it that they're male or female from humans' understanding of those qualities known as male and female archetypes. But in the pleroma, or in the holy realms, there is no such separation, attachment to identities. When you make eyes in place of an eye, in other words, when you hear Christ says eyes in place of an eye, so in other words, you no longer have just one eye, but you have two. And in addition to that, you have the eyes of gnosis, and you're replacing it from the flesh eye, material eye, a hand in place of a hand, and a foot in place of a foot, and an image in place of an image, then you will enter the kingdom. So all these things are referring to replacing the fleshly self and taking on the spiritual body, the spiritual self, and rising above division, which is the devil, essentially. The world of the devil is the world of division. And when we rise above the dichotomy of good and evil, this realm that the God rules over, the demiurge, the God of good and evil, when we rise above that, then everything is no longer dualistic. It becomes a unit, a whole, a full, and complete. That's when we enter into the kingdom. Verse 23, Jesus said, I shall choose you, one from 1,000, and two from 10,000, and they will stand as a single one. So Christ here is referring to those that are chosen to become as saints, or little Christinos. So those that want to go into the ninth realm, who want to be saints, then Christ chooses you to go from the holy soul realm, the eighth realm, into the ninth realm, and then you will come back to the Kenoma as a saint. And that's what the disciples were. He's referring to the disciples. They may not know this, but they're coming back incarnated as saints. And he's asking them to consider to be Christinos, understanding that they too will be persecuted, and some even taken to the cross. And so they'll go to the ninth realm. And if they want to be more than that, then they would go into the pleroma. They would become as Christinos. They're all of the same mind, which is the mind of God, the monad, the ineffable, the pleroma, the emanations, the Christ, the Sophia. They all have one purpose, and that is to bring out truth, which ultimately leads to freedom. Seek you the truth, and you shall be free. And verse 24, his disciples said, show us the place where you are, for we must seek it. So here the disciples are really curious. Where did you come from? They're obviously very astounded by what Christ has to say and share with them, what he's able to do, heal, walk on water, all these things. So they're really just blown away. And so they want to know, are you from another planet? Are you from another world, another dimension? He said to them, anyone here with 2 ears had better listen. There is light within a person of light, and it shines on the world, and it shines on the whole world. If it does not shine, it is dark. So why would Christ answer in this way? Why doesn't it just say, I'm from the heavens, I'm from God, I'm from the pleroma? Why does he bring forth a riddle? Why does he not keep it more simple? First off, he says, anyone here with 2 ears had better listen. And the reason is because if he just comes out and says, the pleroma, or I'm from God, you have to understand the context of where he's talking. Is he talking only to his disciples? Is he talking to a lot of people, perhaps hundreds of people? At that time, it was blasphemous to suggest that you were from God, you were from heaven, you sat with God in heaven. And so it is possible in Christ's wisdom that he knew his time was yet. And so this is one way he went about to let those that could hear. That's what he says. Anyone here with 2 ears had better listen. So that he's sort of chiming them in. And then he goes on and he says, there is light within a person of light. Well, what he's saying is, I'm from the light. That's where I'm from. And you too are from that place if you have light that is shining forth. And it shines on the whole world. So he's saying, I'm everywhere. I'm from everywhere, wherever there is light. And he's not talking about physical physical light as in the outcome of fire burning, but he's talking about the truth, the essence of all things, which is the monad, makes itself known through light, and it shines on the whole world. If it does not shine, it is dark. So he's saying essentially, I'm everywhere there is light, but where there's no light, I'm not there. If it does not shine, it is dark. He's saying, I'm from the light, I am the light, and you are as well. He says, there is light within a person of light, and it shines on the whole world. So this is really the most accurate answer to give the disciples. To just say the pleroma is not going to give them anything to meditate on or to grow into. See, he's speaking a language to them. He's essentially teaching them a new language, but he's doing it in a way that he's speaking within the context or the colloquial understanding of that new language. Not just simply like if you go into a foreign country, people can certainly teach you words, exact words. And that's one way of getting around, but you're not really going to fully get the essence of that culture unless you understand all of the nuances of different ways people say things, idioms and the colloquial understanding of words and the way people say things. For example, in America, we might say a certain thing that a foreigner may not understand if they just go by what's in the dictionary, the translation of a certain word. For example, that person is high-minded. Well, from the standpoint of someone that is from another country, they might think that that person's tall or something like that. So this is what Christ's doing. He's trying to teach them how to speak as God speaks and to really understand the essence of the message of who he really is and where he's really from. Verse 25, Jesus said, love your friends like your own soul, protect them like the pupil of your eyes. So the first one's pretty obvious. Love your friends like your own soul. So you think about your soul, you're thinking about your dreams. Your soul is your dreams and your dreams are your soul. And that's what you're trying to fulfill when you talk about your soul. You're trying to talk about what makes your soul happy is what you want to do, your occupation in life, or finding your partner, your soulmate. These are things that fulfill your sense of longing in this realm called the Knoma. So this is where you want to treat your friends. You want to treat them with regard to their own life dreams and aspirations and respecting that and giving them the space to follow that and support them toward that. And then protect them like the pupil of your eye. Pupil of your eye is the most vulnerable part, like one of the most vulnerable parts of your body. Think about if you were injured in the pupil of your eye, that would be very painful, and it would also put you into blindness potentially. So this is how you want to protect your neighbors and those you love, your family and your friends. You want to love them to that extent. Christ is essentially talking about empathy and talking about love and the way of compassion and guarding those that you cherish. Verse 26, Jesus said, you see the sliver in your friend's eye. See, notice how this is following up. He's following up by this idea of judgment. He's essentially telling you, you don't do this to friends. You don't judge them. This is the way you're going to be able to guard them like you would guard your soul, or love them like you would love your soul, because you understand why you do the things you do, right? So try to be understanding to your friends as to why they might be doing what they're doing, rather than be so quick to judge them. Why Christ is following up verse 26 from verse 25. You see the sliver in your friend's eye, but you don't see the timber in your own eye. When you take the timber out of your own eye, and notice where Christ earlier said, protect them like the pupil of your eye. So don't even allow these slivers or these timbers to even be put into those you love's eyes in the first place, what Christ is saying. When you take the timber out of your own eye, then you will see well enough to remove the sliver from your friend's eye. And he's not talking about removing the sin. He's talking about removing the judgment. That's what he's talking about. You see the sliver in your friend's eye, but you don't see the timber in your own eye. When you take the timber out of your own eye, that's judgment. Then you will see well enough to remove the sliver from your friend's eyes. Verse 27. If you do not fast from the world, you will not find the Father's kingdom. So here, I think it's pretty accessible. It's saying that if you're not able to detach yourself from the things of this world, then it's going to be difficult for you to find the kingdom of God. It's difficult for you to understand gnosis because you have attachments to this world and the things of this world. It goes on and says, if you do not observe the Sabbath as a Sabbath, you will not see the Father. So now, is Christ here telling us that we should follow the Sabbath? Not at all. So let's think about what this word Sabbath means in the first place. It means to return, essentially. So let's look here, and I'm looking this up from the Greek dictionary. The root verb sub generally means to turn back or to return. The very common verb is used in the regular expectable sense of physically turning around and going back to some place. but mostly refers to the mental or spiritual returning away from evil and vice and towards virtue and God. So what does this mean, this returning? So if you do not observe the Sabbath, and Christ here is talking about the actual Sabbath that the Jewish were following at the time, the idea that you can't work on Sunday, you can't pick up, or Saturday rather, the Sabbath. You can't work on Saturday. You couldn't even pick up help someone out of a ditch. Something that Christ was condemned of doing, right? Breaking the Sabbath. He's saying that if you do not observe that way of the Sabbath as a Sabbath, the actual Sabbath, which is to return, to understand that this Sabbath really is about returning back to the pleroma. If you do not observe the Sabbath that you practice as a Sabbath, the actual Sabbath, as the returning, you will not see the Father. Verse 28, Jesus said, I took my stand in the midst of the world, and in flesh I appeared to them. I found them all drunk, and I did not find any of them thirsty. My soul ached for the children of humanity, because they are blind in their hearts and do not see. For they came into the world empty, and they also seek to depart from the world empty. So this is what vast majority of humans are doing. They're trying to gather all the things of this world, thinking that it's going to amount to something. But when people die, they can't take it with them, of course. And so they come into the world empty, and they go out of the world empty. Vast majority of people will tell you that, well, it's just the way of things. Essentially, in other words, this realm has no purpose, because the proto-Orthodox Christians, the Muslims, and all the other Orthodox Christians that follow under the Judean religion in its different permutations will tell you that this world holds no purpose other than to work toward trying to get into heaven by accepting the bloody sacrifice of Jesus. So essentially, there's nothing you can gain from this world other than just simply believing in the story of Jesus. That's it. And there's nothing else to gain. There's no wisdom to gain. There's no gnosis to gain. There's nothing of any consequence to gain other than having to be forced to believe in this Jesus story, else you'll burn forever and ever, or you'll just be evaporated by God, however you want to believe in hell. And then the scientists will tell you, the atheists will simply say to you that, well, this is it. This is all you get. And so from their perspective as well, there's nothing this world can give you other than material things that you gather that collect dust, right? And so when you come into this world, you come in empty, and when you go out empty. And so you don't gain anything. There's no use of this world beyond just this world. That's it. And so forth and so on. So this is what you have. The vast majority of people think that way, that this world has nothing to offer. But if you look at the world around you, you realize that everything has a purpose. Everything has a consequence. Everything has its lesson. Life in and of itself has a lesson. Now, why then would all these lessons that we're learning amount to nothing? It's not logical. Just is not. There's no logic behind that. It doesn't fit into the paradigm of this world even. Every lesson that we learn in this world ultimately results in some type of wisdom that hopefully we've learned from and not have to go about and do the same mistake. So if that's true in this realm, then what evidence do we have that it's not true beyond this realm? In fact, I would argue that there's more evidence to suggest that this world in and of itself is a world that allows you to take wisdom with you and to use it in some way. Okay, so this is what Christ is referring to. So everyone is departing from the world empty, but meanwhile they are drunk. When they shake off their wine, then they will change their ways. And this is what he's saying. He's saying once you get gnosis, this is when you no longer need the alcohol. You no longer need the attachments. You no longer need all of that stuff. But that's the only way to do it, is to have faith beyond, and to understand there is more, and understand the Gnostic way that Christ is teaching you, that you're already loved and you're perfect, as you're perfectly created. And everything that we've talked about in all the other videos about Gnosticism and what it means to find gnosis, and that is going to eventually shake you off from the cares of this world and the attachments thereof. Verse 29, Jesus said, if the flesh came into being because of spirit, that is a marvel. Christ is saying here that it's just incredible that this holy thing, this full thing called the spirit, resulted in this thing called flesh that is incomplete and it's broken. This material realm, the bodies that we carry around. Think about how we're brought into this world as babies. That in and of itself is miraculous. And the fact that, if we get a cut and that it heals, so forth and so on, and we grow up, we eat a little food, and then we get bigger and bigger very rapidly. And that's marvelous. But at the same time, it decays just as rapidly. But if the spirit spirit came into being because of the body, that is a marvel of marvels. So Christ is saying here, if you awaken the spirit in you, that's even more miraculous. So if the flesh came into being because of the spirit, that is a marvel. But if spirit came into being because of the body, that is a marvel of marvels. Yet I marvel at how this great wealth has come to dwell in this poverty. Think about how the power behind everything, life, think about how a little seed can break out of the concrete. Think about that great power. Yet somehow the flesh decays. That great power somehow is diminished. That great power somehow is broken. And yet it's most powerful when it's a little bitty sprout breaking out of the concrete. And from that day forward, it diminishes. Why is that? Do you ever think about that? Do you ever think about why that is? What is that power that drives life to break through concrete, to hold up everything, the essence of all the cosmos and the universes that are swirling about, and yet somehow, very shortly, it decays? Why is that? There's obviously some enormous, immense, powerful energy or something behind this, you see, behind the material realm that we see. And the material realm itself is decadent because it decays rapidly. But just as rapidly, the life force is working to replace it. So this is what Christ is referring to. How is it that this great wealth has come to dwell in this poverty? How is that? In verse 30, Jesus said, "Where there are three deities, they are divine." And here Christ is referring to the Mother, Father, and Christ, which is the divine Trinity as they call it. This is one interpretation of this, but I think also it is possible Christ is setting up the idea that, because he's what's going to follow here, where there are two or one, I am with that one. He's referring to this idea that man that is in the light of Christ, that has gnosis, is more high than even those that are divine. Where there are three deities, yeah, okay, they're divine, meaning they're godlike. But where there are two or more, I am with that one. So he's not with the divine beings, but he's with this one. So this is where he's making this parallel between this side and that side. But also some say that Thomas interpreted this scripture as a way to say the two or one, because Christ recognized at that time that there would be two versions of Christ's message, which would be the proto-Orthodox and the Gnostic. And so Thomas took account of this, and he may have added the word two, I don't know. But where there are two or one, I am with that one. But essentially the bottom line here is that he's saying that if you are whole, and here also he could be referring to the spiritual self and the soul body. So he's saying if you have a soul body and a spiritual body, and you have your priorities in alignment with those, then I'm with you. But if you have it aligned to fleshly things, then, I'm not with you. That's the dark realm. And that's essentially, I think, ultimately, that's probably the best interpretation that I'd get from this verse. But the first part of this, where there are three deities, they are divine, that could be referring to the Mother, Father, Son, Trinity, or it could simply be Christ setting up this as a parallel to what he's going to say thereafter. So either way, it's fine. No one really knows every little detail of every one of these sayings unless the scriptures will support this in other books or verses. Having said that, we can continue to meditate on these truths, and as the saying goes, seek and you shall find. Knock on any door and it will open. This is what Christ asks us to do and provides us wisdom to do. So we'll continue to meditate on what do each one of these verses mean. What is Christ trying to say to us? That's the end of this video. So we'll pick up on verse 31 in video number 4. Talk to you again soon.